Good morning. It's good to be with you almost face to face, well, face to mask anyway. You look better than you did on Zoom, and I'm glad to be back with you again in person. Reason I'm dressed up today is not because I'm a cross-dresser. I did a workshop in last Sierra called Cross-Dressing for Jesus, where I talked about how in mission work we often dress like the people so that we can communicate better. But because today I want to tell you three parables, I want to go over three parables that you know very well, but we're going to look at it through Middle Eastern eyes. And through Middle Eastern eyes we'll understand the parable as Jesus told them. Also, this is not weird for me to be dressed like this. I was in Egypt for 5 years. We worked at the Nile Union Academy, where I was the deputy principal there. And this is how I dressed for church every week. So for me it's normal, for you it's abnormal. When I put this on this morning, my cats ran away from me. A couple of them, we got two cats. I patted them, but then when I patted them, they turned and looked at me, and then they ran away again. So apparently, it's not so friendly for cats to see you like this. Anyway, there's two reasons why I'm wearing it today: to continually bring to your mind that we're looking at these stories through Middle Eastern eyes, and the second thing is the dress actually is a part of the story as well, which you'll see later. The insights that we get into these parables are from commentators in the East, in the Persian area. Aramaic commentaries on Luke, and also Syrian and later even Arabic. Something that we don't think about is that for 1,000 years, there were more Christians in the East, in Persia particularly, than there was in the whole of the West. In the whole of Europe, there were more for 1,000 years. They were the heart of Christianity. But we haven't delved into it at all. It's only been the last, I said 20 or 30, but actually it's probably 50 years, in the last 50 years, that the commentaries and the translations and the versions of the Bible that are available from way back there, 1,800, 1,000 years after Jesus, much later than the documents that became our Bibles, have become available in the West. And what I'm giving you today is based on the hard work of scholars who have tried to see the Bible through Middle Eastern eyes, and also from 5 years living among people whose culture has not changed that much. So that's the story what I want to bring to you today. There are different ways to listen to a parable. The first way is just to enjoy the story. That's how we tell it to the kids. Enjoy the story, they're great stories. And out of the story, there is a lesson built into it that will touch your heart. The second one is to listen for how we should live, to see where there's anything we can learn from the parable that tells us we've been living wrong or we could do better. The next one is to listen for what it tells us about God. And the last one is listen for what Jesus is saying about himself. There are four different ways. The technical terms for it are narrative, ethics, theology, and Christology, but you don't want to know that anyway, do you? So we're going to go to something a little bit simpler. If we want to go deeper, we will benefit from seeing stories through Middle Eastern eyes, and I hope today you'll receive a blessing from that. The three parables I'm talking about are the lost sheep, the lost coins, and the lost son, maybe. Who was Jesus talking to? The Bible says, now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. He was trying to talk to them. They were listening to him. They liked what they heard. It touched their heart. But who was interrupting? The Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." They're on the side. They're not coming too close to the unsanctified, unvaccinated people. They kept a little bit to the edge. But they're grumbling, but loud enough for everyone to hear, because they're saying, who would bother listening to this man? Because look, the sinners like him, so why should we like him? So it's in this context that we have to understand these three stories, because Jesus tells these three stories to the Pharisees and the scribes. He turns from talking to the people who want to hear him to talk to them on the side, and he focuses on them and he tells them three stories. Now we need to keep that in mind in order to get clearly what Jesus was saying. The first story is the story of the bad shepherd who loses a sheep. You thought it was the good shepherd, right? That's because we mix this story up with other stories about good shepherds. But in this story, it's a bad shepherd. And for the boys and girls, you'll be interested to know about shepherds, because we had boys and girls who had been shepherds come to our school. They're often looking after sheep until they're 15 years of age, and then they will come to school, particularly like an academy like ours. Now, what happens is in times of the year, there is very little grass. So they need shepherds to take the sheep to the grass and to where there's water, and to bring them back home again. What happens in the villages, I've been there, know the kids, they've been my students, is that early in the morning, they will go to the square in the village and call out, and the sheep will be released by their owners from their home properties, and they will know the voice of the boy that's looking after them. Sometimes it's a girl, not very often, 20% of them are girls. And they will go and find their shepherd. Now, there's no shepherds today that are looking after 100 sheep. Maybe there was in the past, or maybe that's just to make the story, round the story out. But they will be, depending on the small children will be looking after 5 or 7 sheep, but some of the older ones will look after 25 or 30 sheep. And they go off often together to the same place where there's grass, and they even spend time together during the day while they're keeping their eye on the sheep and making sure they have grass and water. Now, this boy, let's assume he is a boy, maybe a 14-year-old, let's imagine he's 14-year-old. When they come back at night time, he calls the sheep, they follow him, they all go back to the village. When he gets to the village, he notices that one of them is missing. That's really negligent, that he didn't notice from the beginning that one of his sheep is missing. In fact, some of them actually have names, they call them, but they didn't know the sheep. And so he doesn't know what to do. If he takes the sheep all back to their owners, then he will really be in trouble. His family will be in trouble. His family will lose face, he will lose the job, and people will be very angry that he lost a precious sheep. So what they would do today is he would get the others to look after his sheep, and he would go back desperately trying to find the sheep, because his whole job is at stake, because he hasn't cared for the sheep properly. He has been a bad shepherd. And by the way, he says he finds it and he brings it home, the sheep that what? Got itself lost. Now, this is male thinking here, ladies. He's blaming the sheep. The sheep got itself lost. He never blames himself. And he brings it back. So he saves his job. He gets back, he takes the sheep. The owners probably never know it was missing. Of course, his family know that it's missing. He's late for tea. And also his friends, the other shepherds, know as well. And it says he calls together his friends and his neighbours, saying to them, "Rejoice with me." And rejoice with me means come and eat with me. I'm going to throw a feast because I saved my job. Now you can see why it's important to have a feast. Not have a feast because I saved a sheep. No, save the sheep because it saved my job, saved my face. was going to be a really big crisis for him. The story is about bad shepherd. The second one is about a negligent housewife. She's negligent. She hasn't cared for precious property. These coins were part of her dowry. These were very valuable things, not just in money, but sentimental value. And how could she not care for them so they get missing in her own house? Now, when she goes to look for them, she has trouble because the houses are a little bit chaotic, clean on the outside, chaotic, been to many of them, but many of them have clay floors, and the clay floors have cracks in them. The coins could have rolled into the cracks, so she's on her hands and knees, and she's desperate to find it. Nobody else knows. She's doing it by herself. What an idiot to lose these coins in your own house. And so she's under a lot of stress, and she looks everywhere for the money that she lost. She tells her friends and family that she lost it. Isn't this is a little bit more honest than the boy shepherd who said the sheep lost itself, and she's saying she's looking for the money that she lost. She finds it, and relieved housewife, she calls together her friends and neighbours, saying, "Rejoice with me." And once again they eat together. Rejoice and eat. Rejoice and eat. The two stories about rejoice and eat. You can see how that's beginning to link with the criticism that they're levying at Jesus. He welcomes and he eats. He rejoices and he eats with sinners. It is very interesting that when you look at Jesus' stories, he has almost 50% stories about men and 50% stories about women. And there's nobody else in that era that did that. So he's choosing to tell stories about men, then stories about women. And they're all as good or as bad each other time. Sometimes they're heroes, sometimes they're anti-heroes. But he does a combination because Jesus is particular to include everybody in his stories. The third story is something we have got wrong. We call it the parable of the prodigal son. In the Eastern commentaries and the Eastern versions of the Bible, it's quite clear that the prodigal son is not the focus of the third story. It's the older brother who is the focus of the third story. We don't see it because we don't have the same culture. But for them and for the scholars who've gone around asking Arabic people from Syria right through to Egypt, all of them have immediately understood that when the younger son insulted his father, his bright idea to take money and make money in far away, that the older son should have said, "No way." The older son should have stopped it happening. The older son had to come between the father and the son. The son was insulting the father in a way that the people in the Middle East can't believe any son would say, "Father, I wish that you were dead and I had your money. Let's take your money as if you're dead now." They just can't believe anyone would ever do that. Very angry about it. And the people in the story are very angry about it as well. So it's actually about the older son, because by keeping quiet, by not negotiating, by not stopping it happening, what happens? He gets half the property before his father dies without making a fuss, because it's divided in two. Where does the other half stay? Not with the father, goes with the other son. The father becomes a resident on his son's property for the rest of his life, and the people in the village are ropeable. In fact, they have a ceremony unto this day that if someone would do something like that, every household would bring a pail of garbage, and they would pour it on the head of the one who insulted the father, and would banish him from the village and say he could no longer be a member of the village. So the people would have got ready for that, but the younger son knew. He sold the land quickly. By the way, in the Middle East, it usually takes months to negotiate the price of the house, of a property. He sold it within days, No one in the village would have bought it because it was insulting to buy it. So he sold it to a stranger. Some of the early commentaries said he sold it to a Gentile, which makes it even worse. And then he took the money and ran because he knew he was in trouble. But he was going to prove them wrong. He was going to go over there, make $1 million, come back and bless everybody in the village. Everyone would love him forever. His plan, his grand plan. Now that was his plan. It's not the main story, but it's the story that brings out the character of the older son, who is the focus of the third story. So the other son's story just reveals his disdain for his father. Then the younger son comes back, and the older son refuses to go in and rejoice that his brother was found. Refuses to go into what? Into the feast. He refuses to eat. He refuses to welcome. He refuses to eat. You can see how this is the answer to the criticism that the people are giving to Jesus. Exactly. Now I'm going to take you on to the second story just because you know it so well, and give you some extra information that we have about the prodigal son from the commentaries of the East, from the versions of the Bible from the East. Because one of the things that we have done in the West is we have continuously translated when he comes to the place where he's deciding he would even eat the wild carob, which is actually indigestible, that the pigs were eating. Then he thinks, well, what am I doing this? Let's go back. And it says he came to himself, right? And we've often translated that he repented. He was sorry for his sin. He went back to ask forgiveness from his father. But all of the Eastern versions of the Bible say he came up with a new scheme. He came up with a plan. And the plan was how to save his face without being repentant. And that was he was going to go back and get himself skilled as a tradesman and get jobs, including hopefully with his father or his brother, and make some money and then pay them back for the money that he took, and then he would be forgiven. That was his plan. The other thing that has puzzled me, maybe puzzled you, is how come the father waited at home for his son to come back? If he really wanted his son, why didn't he go looking for him in case he was in trouble in a faraway land? Why did he stay at home? And I'm going to tell you what is very clear in the Middle East about that is the father had a real good reason for waiting for him there. And to do that, I'm going to walk around the church a bit. So, have a microphone again? Because he says that he saw his son coming from far off. He was watching for him. Why was he watching for him? The next part of the story tells you why he was watching for him, is that when he saw his son, he immediately came down the stairs and ran through the marketplace to get to his son first. Why? Get there before the lynch mob got to him. He was running to protect him from the very angry villagers who would go and beat him up for coming back. He knew he had to do that. Now, the clothing that I'm wearing is going to demonstrate to you how that's supported by the culture. If he was just looking for his son, he saw his son coming back, his heart was warm, he decided to go out. There's no reason for him to try to be first to get to his son, is there? There's no reason to try to be first. There's no reason to run. An elderly, dignified man like the father never runs in Middle Eastern cultures. You can't run anyway with a galabeah on. You start running and you'll trip over. I actually did it in church once and I tripped over. So I won't do that today because. But the other proof of the pudding is his underwear. Especially for you today, I wore his underwear. And you're going to see the underwear. That's okay? It's long underwear. It's not so bad. Because when he was running, he had to lift his skirt up and run with his long pants, with his long underwear on, which is very humiliating. And he did it right through the market, through the people, and they saw this old man with his dress hiked up and running in his underpants to see somebody in the past. And everyone followed to see what was going on. But he didn't care about his own shame. He didn't care about anything except to get to his son first. And when he got to him, he put his arms around him. The son was starting to reel off his plan, but that was not the critical thing at this point. The critical thing is, how do I change the village anger into acceptance of my son? So he says to his servants who had a job catching up to him, that's how fast he was running, go back and get my robe, the robe of my status, and my ring, and bring it to me. And he's holding his son by the shoulder, and the crowd is coming, and they say, oh, it's that terrible son. But they don't know what to do at that time, the father, but he can't hold on to him forever. So therefore, when the servants come back, he puts the cloak on him, he gives him the ring on him, and he said, my son has come back. And I want you all to rejoice with me. In fact, we're going to have a feast. I've got a fatted calf I've been saving for this occasion, and I'm going to cook the fatted calf. And everyone's heart is settled down a bit. Everyone begins to look forward to the feast, and then people start to have music and all that sort of thing. And then he makes a feast down the middle of the street, so that everyone will change their attitude and welcome his son back like he welcomes him back. And then the older son comes back, hears the music, finds out what's happening, and he refuses to go to the feast. He refuses to go to the feast. In fact, it's even worse than that. The father comes out to plead with him to come, which never will happen in the Middle East. A father will not go and ask a son to come. And he goes out and asks him. This father has no pride. He's a humble man. And he still refuses to go in. In fact, he says to his father, Father, I've been working with you, slaving for you all of these years, and you never gave me a feast. He comes back, this one who wasted his money on immoral living, which was not true, by the way. It's not part of the story at all. He just made it up. He didn't have a clue what he was doing. He was just going overseas to do some investment and try to make some money, and had a rough time. It was a famine, it was whatever. But he says, and then he comes back and you throw a thing, and the father says, you had the better part, didn't you? I was with you all the time. I was with you. I think all of us, many of us have had experience of children that ignore their parents, reject their parents. That just have no contact with their parents at all. When everything opened up last Sunday, was it? Last maybe Saturday. My daughter is a chaplain at Warburton, Yarra Valley Aged Care, and only 17 of the people in the home had people come and visit them that day. And the other 49 had no one come visiting them. And and still some have not come back. So the father had been with the son, with the older son, all of that time. Don't know how long it was. The story is a story, but the story, we've got to pretend the story is true. But the son had not been happy with him. He said, I've been a slave to you. and you never threw a party for me. And the Father says, I've been with you. I've been with you. This is what the Father on the other hand from the older son, welcomes a sinner and eats with him, and gets everyone else to welcome him and eat with him as well. This is exactly the accusation that the scribes and Pharisees are interrupting his talk to the ordinary people with. And he says we had to celebrate and rejoice because he was lost and has been found. We had to. We had to. We have no choice. Jesus is saying, I have to welcome sinners. I have to eat with them. I have to rejoice when any of them turn. So what did Jesus say to them, the Pharisees? What's he saying to them? And what's he saying to us? He's actually saying to them, the publicans and sinners that I am welcoming and eating with have been driven out of the church by you. They have been neglected by you. They have been lost because of you. You are bad shepherds. I'm having to do double work because you've been bad shepherds. And he says, you have been bad housewives. Now that was an insult. To call a Pharisee or scribe a woman was really an insult. But Jesus knew how to take the mickey out of people for good reason. And he said, you are the ones that have neglected to get the treasure that was there in these ordinary people. So what does he say to us? Are you like a bad shepherd? Are you someone who has been neglecting somebody you shouldn't have been neglecting? Are you a negligent housewife? Are you someone who's been careless with the gifts God has given you so that when you need them, you can't find them and you get desperate about them? Jesus says, unless you rejoice with others, you will be the despicable son and daughter of your compassionate Father. Unless you rejoice with others, you look for the good in others. I told the early service, I'm going to tell it again, the story that happened this week. It's just a simple story. I went into the post office. I was buying something there. It was under $10. They said, we can't take your card. I said, no problem. I'll just go and get it from the ATM next door. Went next door, got the money, came back in. As I came back in, went back to where the lady was waiting for my money, and a lady said loudly, hey, you have to check in first. So I waited till I was finished, and I went and found her. She was in one of the aisles looking at stuff. And I said, can I talk to you? She didn't want to talk to me. She was quite happy to shout at me, but wasn't happy to have a conversation with me. I said, I just want to give you a tip for life that will help you. Lots one I learned later in life is that when you talk to a stranger, always begin with a question first. And if you had said to me, have you checked in? I would have been able to say, yeah, I just checked in 5 minutes ago. Thank you very much for caring. I'm just bringing some money in. And it all would have been good. And she didn't want to talk to me, didn't want to face to me. I said, hey, you began the conversation. I wouldn't be having a conversation with you if you hadn't begun it. And I'm just ending it. But she never did say sorry. She just wished I'd never even talked to her. But anyway, she was probably embarrassed, or maybe shouldn't have made her embarrassed. But there you go. That's what it's like. Pouncing on the mistakes of others, being a policeman for others, assuming that they're doing the wrong thing. Guilty until proved innocent. That's not the spirit that Jesus is teaching us here, unless we rejoice with others. Among the publicans and sinners, he did see good things. You remember when the friends let the paralytic down through the roof? By the way, it was the roof of his own house. If you go and read carefully, Jesus had his own house. He'd probably built it himself. He was a builder, by the way, not a carpenter. Carpenter is not such a good translator. He was a builder who had many skills, probably mosaic skills, building in Cephalus next to next to them. Anyway, he probably built his own house. Ellen White says that there was so much tension in the house after his father died that he was no longer happy there, and he moved to live in Capernaum. And he was in his own house, and if someone wants to meet him, there's a crowd of people in there. They break down the straw and mud roof, all of it coming down on everyone's head, just to bring their friend there. And Jesus looks up and he's amazed at their faith. What would you be doing if that happened? Hey, take a number. There's a machine at the door. Pull the number, wait and turn. But no, he looks at them and he sees their faith. And he's amazed by the faith that they have, that they believe that even though they know everyone's going to be really mad about this, that Jesus is not going to be mad about it, and Jesus is going to do something about it. So unless you rejoice with others, unless you look for the good in others, unless you expect to find good in others, unless you ask questions first, you will be the despicable son and daughter of a compassionate Father. What does Jesus say to us? The sinners Jesus welcomes and rejoices with are your family, are your friends, are your brothers and sisters, whether you like them or not. Ones that you despise because of their points of view, because of their attitudes, because of what they're doing, they are your brothers and sisters. Don't refuse to go in and eat with them because you despise them. That's what Jesus is telling us through the story. That's what Jesus taught, as seen through Middle Eastern eyes, and you've heard the story from many other angles, and they're all good too, and lessons are good too, but this one gets down to what Jesus actually was doing and saying at that moment. Now, the application is something that I can't do for you. You have to make for yourself, and that's probably more important at this than the original story. You've heard the original story, you got the message, now apply it to yourself. Is always being with the Father enough for you? Or are you looking for benefits? Are you upset when you have a prayer and God doesn't answer your prayer or whatever? Is just being with the Father? If not, shouldn't our focus being with the Father? There's all kinds of issues around us, as you know, political, medical, all the rest of it. Let's make sure we keep our focus on the main event, the main story. The main story is to rejoice in being with the Father and find a way to rejoice and eat with others that we maybe have judgments about. What does this story say to you? Are you at peace and content with God? That is what we should be seeking. And God is there waiting for us. He's going to try to protect us from shame. He's going to welcome us. He's going to treat us as if we'd never done wrong. He's going to reestablish us, and he's going to try to turn everybody else to change their attitude towards us as well. That's what God is doing. What does the story say to you? Remember that Jesus welcomes sinners and eats with them. Let's take these stories seriously. Let's pray. And now, to him who is able to keep us from falling and present us faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy, to the only wise God, our Saviour, be glory and majesty, dominion and power, now and forever. Amen.